Hello, everyone, and welcome to our town hall addressing non-physical risk factors for musculoskeletal disease prevention. For those I haven't met, I'm Nadia Ulam-Morin, Senior Program Manager for the National Safety Council MSD Solutions Lab. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. We have a fantastic speaker lineup this afternoon, as well as some exciting program updates to share. But before we dive into today's program, I want to share a few words about the MSD Solutions Lab. Those of you may be familiar know by now that musculoskeletal disorders, or MSDs, aren't just one of the biggest safety challenges facing today's workers. They're also one of the biggest challenges facing today's employers. Not only do they take a physical and psychological toll on workers themselves as the second leading cause in shortening employees' working years, but MSDs are costly. Each year, private businesses in the US lose a total of $17 billion in lost wages and medical expenses due to these injuries. It's for these reasons NSC, with funding and support from Amazon, has been so focused on addressing the widespread safety challenge these past couple of years. Our mission at the lab is simple: to eliminate MSDs from workplaces worldwide, so workers can spend more time doing the things they love with the people they love. We're already making tremendous progress by engaging key stakeholders, conducting research, identifying new technology, innovating solutions, and scaling the results so all workplaces can benefit. In fact, through our Hallmark MSD Pledge program, over 200 of the world's leading organizations, representing more than 2.8 million employees, have joined us on this journey to transform workplace safety. Now, I'd like to switch gears to the rest of today's agenda and introduce our speakers. First, we're pleased to be joined by our own MSD Solutions Lab Research Manager, Paige DeBello, PhD, to take us through today's topic, accounting for non-physical risk factors in MSD prevention. And following Paige's keynote, we will be joined by two experts for a moderated panel discussion. And this panel consists of Blake McGowan, Solution Executive at Velocity EHS, and Jack Liu, PhD, Manager for the Musculoskeletal Health Program at NIOSH. And we will welcome questions from the audience and do our best to get to them during today's event or in follow-up communications. And if you have a question, please feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then finally, we'll conclude with some program updates and discuss our next resource. So to kick off our town hall event, please join me in welcoming Paige DeBello. Dr. Paige DeBello is the research manager working in the National Safety Council's MSD Solutions Lab. Paige leads the lab's research efforts to generate accessible, practical, and novel research related to emerging issues in the MSD prevention space, inclusive of assessing the relationship between DE&I and MSDs, assessing less commonly studied MSD risk factors like psychosocial and organizational factors, and highlighting MSD solution pilots and case studies. Paige is also skilled in quantitative and qualitative research methods, program evaluation, systemic literature reviews, and meta-analysis in survey development and validation. She has edited, reviewed, and published occupational health, workplace stress, developmental psychology, and scale development and validation-related research papers in leading academic journals, and has presented her work at national conferences. Welcome, Paige DeBello.
All right, thanks for that introduction, Nadia. And just a quick note here to denote that the work by the MSD Solutions Lab is funded by Amazon, but that the contents here don't necessarily represent the views of Amazon. So, okay, I'm excited to dive into discussing the importance of accounting for non-physical risk factors of MSDs with you all this afternoon. And while this discussion is centered around MSD prevention and mitigation, I know that we probably have lots of safety professionals here today who focus on a variety of different hazards and injuries. So I really hope that this discussion can further our thinking around non-physical risk factors for all safety issues and really move us more toward a holistic look at injury prevention. And also, like Nadia mentioned, I wanted to note that after my introductory keynote, we're going to move into some question and answer time with our expert panel. So we do have some questions to ask our panel, but we want to take questions from you all as well. So as you listen to this portion of the town hall today, feel free to utilize that Q&A function to ask questions as they might arise for you. So first, just to kind of set the groundwork, let's talk about the different types of risk factors that we see impacting musculoskeletal disorders and what we really mean by non-physical risks. So here you can see MSDs in the middle and the differing categories of risk that might impact a person's likelihood of suffering from an MSD on the spokes. So we've got psychosocial, organizational, behavioral, individual, and physical represented here. So now all of these, but individual, we are categorizing into the grouping of modifiable risk factors. Individual factors include variables such as your sex or your genetic predisposition. These cannot be modified and therefore should not be the focus of MSD prevention and mitigation. Yet we don't want to ignore these since they do still have an impact on your likelihood of developing an MSD. So we're giving them space here in this larger conceptualization framework. Another risk factor that we want to introduce but not spend time on, and if you can go back, please, for the purposes of this town hall, is physical risk factors. So while these are modifiable risks, they do have to do with the physical aspects of one's work and are not non-physical risks. So we'll introduce these a bit on the next slide, but we won't focus on these today. So that leaves us with those three non-physical modifiable sets of risk factors. So psychosocial, organizational, and behavioral that you see on top here. And just before we keep moving forward, I want to acknowledge that other academics and practitioners may have categorized these types of risk factors in differing ways before. Some might be collapsing psychosocial and organizational into one category of psychosocial. Some might be leaving out behavioral risks or lifestyle risks altogether. And others categorize the more granular risks that we'll be talking about underneath each of these groupings differently. This could feel like it leaves researchers and safety professionals at a loss for how to communicate about these risk factors. And we really hope that the conceptualization laid out here in this talk and in the accompanying paper that we'll be publishing here in the next couple of weeks gives everyone a common framework and way to think about these risks. It's really our feeling in the MSD Solutions Lab that these risks can often go undetected. And this could subsequently be the reason that some workplaces still experience high levels of MSD risks, even after implementing controls for physical risks. So moving into the next slide, as to not ignore their importance and prevalence in the MSD prevention space, we did want to go ahead and talk briefly about physical MSD risks before moving into talking about those non-physical risks. Physical risks concern the physical requirements or biomechanical aspects of job tasks that can influence health and work performance. Commonly, these are factors like overexertion, working in awkward postures, or engaging in repetitive movements. And in many cases, there are administrative or engineering controls that organizations engage in to reduce or eliminate these risks. Some companies might also be using things like emerging technologies, such as exoskeletons or cobots, to help reduce these risks as well. So all in all, lots of interventions and controls have been developed and implemented to reduce physical risks in workplaces across the world. Yet, as we're going to talk about, less interventions and solutions have been posited for non-physical risks. And therefore, it's where we're going to spend the bulk of our attention during today's town hall. And again, while not the focus of our talk today, we did want to just introduce individual risks a bit more. These, again, are unmodifiable risk factors such as sex, genetics, and your age. So even though the workplace cannot make an impact on these factors as they are innate to the worker, it's important to be aware of how these risk factors might impact the likelihood of a worker suffering from an MSD. For instance, someone who is older may be more likely to suffer from a more serious MSD that leaves them away from work for longer than someone who is younger. But finally, jumping into our modifiable non-physical risks. So the first of these that we'll talk about are psychosocial risks. These types of risks concern the interactions between and among your work environment, the type of job that you do, your organizational conditions, and workers' capacities, needs, and culture that could influence health and work performance. These factors can be things like stress, occupational fatigue, or your mental workload, and a lack of support from your colleagues. These types of risks are much more psychological in nature and can be detrimental to employees' health and their likelihood of suffering from an MSD at work. So talking about these risks, I think is a lot more tangible with some examples. So as you can see here, psychosocial risks can have both direct and indirect impacts on the chance of incurring an MSD. Having a high mental workload, for example, can impact a worker's body posture when lifting, which could subsequently impact their MSD likelihood. This is an indirect link, but could still have important impacts. Also, several researchers have found that having low levels of job satisfaction can lead to more musculoskeletal complaints, especially complaints of low back pain. Others have cited that stress can increase the risk of developing upper extremity or back MSDs, while lower levels of support have been found to be correlated with MSDs and can prolong one's recovery from an MSD as well. These examples are just some of the reasons why you might be seeing an increased emphasis on creating cultures of safety at work as well, as positive cultures within organizations usually come with higher job satisfaction, less stress, and more colleague support. So our efforts for fostering stronger workplace cultures should also have a ripple effect and can impact workplace safety and MSD likelihood. So next up are organizational risks. These have more to do with aspects of your job that the organization itself has direct control over, such as the way that your work might be designed, organized, or managed. These factors can include things like being short-staffed, having long working hours or demanding work schedules, so inclusive of things like shift work or overnight work, and the pace of work that is needed in order to meet your job demands. I think these examples also really help to delineate the differences between organizational and psychosocial factors. These are more about organizational processes, structures, and procedures, and are less about an individual's feelings or reactions to external stimuli. So again, let's look at some examples to help contextualize this a bit more. So as mentioned on the previous slide, aspects of one's work, such as long working hours, so defined as more than 40 hours of work a week for this particular study, shift work, which was described as work outside of kind of a typical 9 to 5, 8 to 4 schedule, and a lack of personnel are related to increases in MSDs. Also, a rapid pace of work, so denoted by some as work quickening, can also increase MSD risks. Not being in control of aspects of your work, such as the tasks required of you or things like your schedule, can also lead to higher MSD risks. And if it feels like your employment is in jeopardy, or if you work in an organization or industry with routine layoffs, leading to increased job insecurity, this can also lead to more musculoskeletal complaints. And lastly, while this has been a bit debated in some meta-analyses, it seems that on the whole, inadequate job training and inadequate training on workplace safety, more specifically, can lead to a higher risk of MSDs. And the last of our modifiable non-physical risks are the behavioral risks. And I want to note here that some of these risk factors might kind of at face value seem like things that are not able to be impacted by one's workplace. However, increasingly, there's been an emphasis on organizations taking more of a role in helping employees develop healthy habits through different health promotion programs, and thus these behaviors can in part be impacted by one's workplace. These factors include things like tobacco use or tobacco smoking habits, substance use, sleeping habits, and nutrition, diet, and exercise. And so you'll note some of the more recent publication dates on this slide as we move into assessing these risk factors more in tandem with MSDs. So notably, getting less than 6 hours of sleep a day is related to a higher occurrence of MSDs. We can see how this might also easily be correlated with demanding work schedules or longer working hours. Alcohol use specifically is associated with neck and shoulder pain and higher rates of MSDs. Tobacco use also is correlated with higher chances of experiencing low back pain and developing arthritis. Having a higher BMI has been found to be associated with increased MSD symptoms and also slower recovery. And related, being more physically active can help to reduce the risk of MSDs. And I can understand that maybe some of these risks might feel challenging to address since these are employee behaviors. However, even just simply being aware of their existence and working to implement programs that could help to promote more healthy behaviors and lifestyles could be a step in the right direction. So thinking about that, step in the right direction, what can we do about these risks? So we all have these solutions for physical risk factors, lifts, carts, exoskeletons, technology solutions, guidelines around lifting, job modification. Really, the list goes on and on for physical risk factor solutions. But interventions to address non-physical risk factors are often really slim to none in organizations. So with that in mind, what can we do to try to impact the effects of these risks? Or what are some first steps that organizations can take to start tackling such risks? And I think a first step to that is kind of figuring out how safety professionals can and should get involved here. So mitigating some of these risk factors we just covered might feel like it's not the job of safety and health professionals. Health promotion programs or ensuring adequate supervisor and colleague support may seem more like human resources or well-being initiatives. However, EHS professionals are really urged to take a leadership role in championing the mitigation of non-physical risk factors as well. These factors don't just impact organizational culture or employee satisfaction, but they clearly are linked to important health and injury outcomes as well. And lastly, before we have our experts join us in just a minute or so to dive deeper into this, I wanted to preface us with a bit of information about ways to integrate non-physical risk factor mitigation into your organization. So first, it's imperative to measure the presence of non-physical risk factors. If you don't even know which factors are impacting your workforce, you can't begin to mitigate those risks. An easy way to do this, or at least to start doing this, is to implement perception surveys that address topics such as job stress, support, and satisfaction. Also, making sure workers know about the connection between these risk factors and their injury likelihood is also important. So education can really go a long way here. Next, taking a participative approach and really getting your workers involved and suggesting solutions for some of these risks is important. And lastly, making sure that management knows how to identify these risks is really important. So just as a manager should be able to walk the shop floor and spot physical hazards, managers should also be moving more toward an ability to view non-physical risks just as easily. And so with that introduction to non-physical risk factors, I'll pass it back over to you Nadia, to bring us into the next portion of our event today.
Thank you so much, Paige, for taking us on that deep dive into MSD non-physical risk factors and laying the foundation for the moderated Q&A. So for our next conversation, I'm excited to welcome our panelists for today, Jack Liu and Blake McGowan. Dr. Jack Liu is a certified professional ergonomist and a researcher at NIOSH. He holds a PhD in industrial hygiene and ergonomics from the University of Cincinnati and has 25 years of research experience in biomechanics and epidemiology for the prevention of work-related musculoskeletal disorders. Jack serves on many advisory boards for the prevention of MSDs and standard development committees. His expertise on ergonomics includes the prevention of MSDs related to workplace psychosocial stressors, the revised NIOSH lifting equation, ergonomic risk assessments, interventions for material movers, and healthcare workers. And I'd like to introduce Blake McGowan, who is a solution executive and former director of research at Velocity EHS. Based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, he joined Velocity EHS in 1999. Blake holds a certificate in leading sustainable corporations from the University of Oxford, a Master of Science degree in human neuromechanics, and a Bachelor of Science degree in biomechanics and neurophysiology from the University of Waterloo in Canada. He's also achieved recognition as a certified professional ergonomist. So with that, Paige, I'll hand it over to you to moderate the discussion with a few Kickstarter questions as audience questions roll in. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks so much, Nadia, for introducing those expert speakers. And so Jack and Blake, welcome. As Nadia mentioned, we're happy to take some audience questions off the bat if any of those have rolled in yet, although I don't see that they have. And if not, we can just move into some of the questions that we had to kind of get us started here with Jack and Blake. So Jack, I'll kick this one over to you first. Non-physical risk factors, as we just heard, are impactful on MSD likelihood, but really programs are seldom in place to reduce such risk factors. So what are some guidelines for reducing these risk factors in the workplace?
Yes. When we talk about non-physical risk factor, we tend to include the personal and the psychosocial risk factors. And personal risk factors are more clearly defined, as we all know, the sex and the age. And those factors sometimes are addressed in the physical ergonomic guidelines. So I'm not going to repeat that. But what I'm going to emphasize today and share the information with the public is really for the psychosocial stressors. So there are many guidelines documents out there for you to review. And the oldest document, to my knowledge, is published by NIOSH in the 90s by our branch chief, Steve Sauter at the time, called Stress at Work. For some of those old timers, you may be familiar with this little pamphlet book. It's a very concise version, and you can just read a pamphlet maybe in 10 minutes to understand how to identify stress, how to manage the stress, and start a stress management program. And the second document I would like to share with the public is it's published by the International Labor Office. I really like the ILO's document entitled Stress Prevention at Work Checkpoints. And ILO love checkpoints. And I think a lot of practitioners love checkpoint as well because it's easy to use and very straightforward, no academic jargon. You really look at what is the social support, you check it, and it tells you the rationale behind that. It tells you how to do it, how to manage the risk factors, one checkpoint by another checkpoint. So this is a very easy to read document. And the third and the fourth document I would like to share with you is our standardization document developed by, first is a Canadian standard CSA Z1003-13. It's a very long name, you may not remember, but just remember the title is called Psychosocial Health and Safety in the Workplace. That was published in 2013. And there's a recent publication by ISO standard 450003 that was published in 2021, I believe, entitled Psychosocial Health and Safety at Work, Guideline for Managing Psychosocial Risk. But I would like to emphasize that all the psychosocial risk document, those guideline documents, are not specifically designed for mitigating psychosocial risk factor for MSDs. In fact, I'm not aware of any particular psychosocial guideline document that is designed for MSDs. And another document I would like to mention is a nice document called Fundamentals of Total Worker Health Approaches. This is a good companion document for some of you who are familiar with our NICE Total Worker Health program. What it really means is really take care of the worker from all different type of risk factors, not just the work-related risk factor. And this fit into the paradigm of the psychosocial research very well, because a lot of psychosocial stressor can spill over from family, or it can spill a crossover from work to the family, or vice versa. So we really have to treat the worker as a whole, not just consider the workplace factors. Maybe to consider non-workplace factor is even more effective in terms of controlling the risk factor for MSD. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Paige.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jack. I think that is a wealth of references and resources for folks to reference when looking for some guidelines around this. So really, thanks for mentioning those. I have seen that we've had a couple questions run into the Q&A, so I'm going to go ahead and skip over to those first. So I'm seeing a question that came in from Paul that says, how do safety initiatives, so things like training programs, implementing exoskeletons, or other safety equipment, impact psychosocial factors? So while they benefit physical risks, do they also help some of these psychosocial risk factors? Or maybe they're seen more as a burden by workers, or maybe there's a bit of a crossover thing happening there. So Blake, I see you doing a lot of head nodding. Do you want to go ahead and take that one?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And a particular, scenario comes to my mind, but I could probably think of many others. I know in the early days when some of these more advanced technologies are introduced, such as exoskeletons, individuals that are asked to test out or pilot these are really put in a unique scenario or situation. I've heard comments from employees saying, it looks like everyone's watching me. I feel nervous. I feel stressed. It's pointing me out and putting me in an uncomfortable situation. And, I think there are some unintended consequences of these types of technologies. Another example, in our organization, we utilize computer vision and machine learning to assist with, the identification and quantification of MSD risk. But sometimes people feel that's all that's needed. So they just have to go out to the floor, videotape the job, and then race back to the office to do the assessments. And I think that's a mistake. And if we're in that scenario, I think there's an opportunity here. We can save some time on doing the physical risk factor assessment and borrow some of that time to do more of the non-physical, risk factor assessment, just like some of the very, very basic things that we've all been taught to, just general observation and communicating with the employee and putting them in control of the scenario. And even going back even further, I think a lot of times as professionals, we put stress on our employees when we do assessments, and there's some good ways that we can overcome that. But that's a great question.
Thanks for going ahead and answering that, Blake. And I think one of the things that you touched on in your answer is, participatory ergonomics and getting folks kind of involved in that process a bit more. So that leads us into one of the other questions that we have here. So participatory ergonomics is vital to MSD prevention. So could maybe we discuss how participatory ergonomics can be leveraged for non-physical risk factor mitigation? And Blake, maybe we can start with you, and then Jack, we can come over to you.
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in participatory ergonomics. I think there's data that suggests that it actually gets better results than relying solely on experts. I think educating your work environment, or your workers, on the fundamentals allows them to reduce that, that barrier or stress in being part of the solution. It engages them in the job improvement process, which I think is really, really important. And, it's an opportunity to build more trust as a safety professional with your employees. Probably the biggest thing that I ever do to minimize those non-physical risk factors when doing my physical risk factor assessments is just asking the operator to teach you how to do the job. And it eliminates a lot of barriers to communication. It puts them in control. So one of the biggest barriers for implementing solutions, or good ones, is the lack of perceived control by the operator. And there's no better way to get them in control than for them to teach you about the job and then be part of the job improvement process and implement a solution that is meaningful to them. Because I think a lot of employees get very stressed out when you've got a very well-educated person coming with a clipboard, watching their movements, it automatically puts them in a defensive mood. So if you can switch that around a little bit, put them in control, it's a great way to really maximize your participatory approach.
Yeah, thanks. Some really great examples there. And Jack, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit more information about this participatory ergonomics. And participatory approach is not really a leverage for mitigating psychosocial risk factor. It is, in fact, the core of the effective interventions for psychosocial stressors. And if you look at all the guidelines for mitigating psychosocial stress for MSD, you will actually find that the participatory approach, it is the fundamental for MSD prevention. For example, if you want to plan interventions for reducing psychosocial stressors, and you must engage workers in developing the solutions at a job, at a team and a work organizational level, all three levels, one step at a time. And most importantly, it is to assess the psychosocial stressors at the work organization level, because a poor relationship between a worker and a supervisor may go away temporarily if they don't work together anymore, right? But the same problem may still emerge in the same job if the systematic psychosocial problem exists, if the company has a very poor safety culture at a work organizational level. So I just want to emphasize that the participatory ergonomics program, in particular, mitigating the psychosocial risk factor is extremely important. And in our kind of like a Bible, the elements of ergonomics program, we actually recently added the step 7, which wasn't in the original book. In the step 7 of the elements of our national ergonomics program, it is to address the participatory approach. Okay, there are a few key in the step 7, and you're welcome to go to our website to download a document to review step 7. Basically, the essence of the message is to engage workers in developing solutions.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Jack. And I see that we have another question that was in the Q&A. And just in summation, it's saying that they've had some ergonomic self-assessments, but they've seen that some of their workers are more interested in just getting new equipment and less interested in maybe changing some of their behaviors. And how can they change the culture? And I think, at least it feels to me, that some of this stuff we've been talking about with participatory ergonomics could be a great way to start to get those employees more involved. I don't know if we have any follow-up to that before we move on to our next question, but...
Yeah, I would say in my experience, there's 2 reasons why operators resist change. One is the fear of the unknown, and the second is the lack of perceived control. And, first off is fairly easy to overcome the fear of the unknown. It's providing some education at their level and offering them some tools that they can understand, and inviting them into the process helps out. The second one, the lack of perceived control, is very, very hard for a lot of safety professionals to give up and give back to the operator so that they're interested in driving that solution forward. And again, a couple of things that I've learned is, always try to do the job and have the employee explain it to you. It is a very clear indication who is in control of the situation. Second is only communicate with the employee in the form of questions. I do see with a lot of young professionals as well as engineers, the first thing they want to do is get out of their office, race down to the floor and provide solutions before even communicating and getting that bonding and rapport, understanding truly what the cause is, and if it's even in the person's, realm of responsibility. So those are a couple of things that I've learned the hard way over the 25 years, but when you start to practice them, it's a great way to make sure that they buy into the better solutions.
Thanks for adding that, Blake.
Hey, Paige, I would like to share the story with the audience. And probably 10, 15 years ago, I did a study with a large airline companies by implementing engineering control, since the question is about engineering control, right? And in relation to psychosocial stressors. So what happened is this group of people, they are airport baggage handlers, lifting a lot of heavy bags and a lot of injuries in a small compartment in the belly of the narrow body airplanes. So very, very awkward postures. And they are lifting bags on their knees, on their bottoms, and a lot of injuries. So the company implementing this equipment is basically a conveyor roller bay that actually go into the belly of the airplane. It's called a power stoves. And that is supposed to solve the physical risk factors, but unfortunately, they did not communicate with the workers very well. So the workers were they were afraid that they are losing their job. So this is job insecurity is a big psychosocial risk factor for MSDs. And a few days later, they did accept the implementation of the equipment. But that just kind of this story is to highlight the importance of communicating with the workers, engaging them in using equipment in the first place. Don't just put equipment right there all of a sudden without their involvement. And they are very resistant. In the first few days I was there observing their job, collecting data, they did not want to use that at all. The equipment was sitting there for days. And eventually, I think the worker unions and the management finally had some effective communication about they are not going to be fired just because, you know, the equipment is going to replace their job, and they feel much better, and they start using it, and they start feeling the benefit of using the equipment. So this thing goes hand to hand. They are not mutually exclusive. So I just want to share this story since the audience asked this question about equipment and the psychosocial factors.
I think that's a great answer, Jack. And I have another example. Over the last 25 years, every time I've gone into a manufacturing facility, I always, you know, pose a question to their leadership and engineering group. You know, so I'll make you a bet that I can find one lifting device not plugged in or, you know, tied off to a beam. And no one's ever taken me up on that bet because they know it's true. You know, it's easy to provide a piece of equipment. It's hard to understand how it's going to be useful, and it's harder to get the employee to understand why it's helpful for them, because the biggest feedback you're going to get from an employee about using, you know, external lifting devices is it slows them down. So the priority is getting my work done. My second priority is getting it done safely. Now, if you're going to provide me with a solution that slows me down, I get minute-by-minute feedback on my pace of work. I don't get minute-by-minute feedback on how safely I'm working. So you really have to understand, you know, the priorities of that employee and what things they're dealing with and what type of other pressures they're getting in order to find a better solution. And those better solutions are available if you ask the right questions and continue to talk to your employees.
Yeah, thanks so much for those examples. I think those really highlight, great instances of taking a participatory approach to implementing some of this. And so I want to scoot over to another question that we have from the chat here. So this is from Timothy. It says, as stated earlier, better overall health, so physical and mental health of the employees results in fewer safety and MSD issues. So how often are safety programs combined with wellness programs? And in your opinion, maybe should these two programs be combined? So I'm not sure who wants to take this first, but I'll just open it up to you guys.
I would say in general, the organizations I work with probably have a title that's called safety and health. But more times than not, the higher priority is the safety side of it. And, you know, those safety professionals are really focusing on that end. There are organizations that do a good job of promoting that healthy behavior as well as a safe workplace. Sometimes it's two different groups of people. The challenge is, you know, the compliance to that outside of work hours. You know, compliance is between 10 and 20%. Which is hard. So then it gets down to that motivation. How do you create those environments where people want to participate in those types of things? As you mentioned, things like sleep and BMI impact MSDs. So how do you educate those employees and help them understand how it not just helps them at work, but in other elements of their life that are really going to be the things that drive them to make that decision change.
Yeah, thanks, Blake.
I think from my anecdotal interaction with practitioners, I know there's a growing trend in implementing wellness program in the industry. And the effectiveness of the wellness program in reducing the MSD, I would say, is unclear. I'm not aware of good literature pointed out the effectiveness of such program. Doesn't mean that this program it's not good. I mean, in my opinion, wellness program has a lot of different health effects. MSD is just one of those facets of this effect. You know, for example, mental health issue is a big issue in the healthcare sectors, right? We all know that Biden administration, you know, issued executive order, and CDC. We have a huge initiative for taking care of the mental health problem in the healthcare workers. We all know that. And the literature has shown that there's a very, very high correlation between mental health and MSD. So if you have a good wellness program that can take care of the mental health problem in your workforce, it's most likely your MSD, the psychosocial aspect of the MSD risk factor in your workplace will be mitigated as well, because they kind of go hand in hand. You know, I'm not against the wellness program, but I do encourage the practitioners, if you do implement the program, and maybe you can team up with the researchers, start evaluating the program, and so we can share your findings. I think that's probably the best way to address this uncertainty.
And maybe just another example page of how I've seen this not align. You know, everyone has this experience where they go on site or meet as a group to do some type of, you know, intervention with regards to ergonomics. You start in the morning, work through lunch, and finish up in the evening. And you can just look at the counter with the type of food that is provided during those events. You know, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a whole bunch of sodas, followed by a nice pizza lunch with, you know, snacks and chocolate and all other things. So, you know, there's an opportunity for us to do the simple things, right? As we're talking about safety or reduction of MSDs, you know, the health side of it, we can also make those easy decisions of providing more healthy food and, you know, the appropriate amount of movement during the day, the appropriate amount of breaks too.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that's a key example of, you know, practice what you preach. So thanks for sharing that. And Blake, maybe let's stick with you. So from Velocity EHS's perspective, are there ways in which you all are considering incorporating non-physical risk factors into your platforms, or ways in which maybe this is already happening?
Yeah. Inside of the software platform, you know, as Jack had mentioned, there's a lot of checklists, but there's nothing super formalized that we can get a score. So we focused most of our, you know, and focus most of our efforts on kind of the services and the approach side of things. You know, a lot of times we deploy what we call like a continuous improvement event or a rapid event where, you know, it's driven solely by the employee. So they are fully in control. They have autonomy to do the assessment. We provide them a simple tool so they can actually conduct it and understand it and communicate it. And they're the driver behind the job improvement process. But more importantly, it results in a quick improvement of physical change to the workplace, something that, you know, in a lot of organizations, they don't have experience with that. And it changes their mind with regards to ergonomics can actually be about improvements, not just assessments. So at Velocity EHS, we focus mainly on the services side of implementing those non-physical risk factor approaches. And then the software is mainly focused on the physical side. But there are a couple of tools that are out there. One is called the cognitive load assessment for manufacturing, which I think is a very intriguing tool, very simplistic, you know, a rating between 1 and 8. I see something like that might be maybe our first step into a tool that can identify and quantify and prioritize the impact. And I think it also has the opportunity to direct people towards actual meaningful changes to the workplace. So, you know, we're investigating that, and hopefully we'll be able to share something like that in the future.
Very cool. Yeah, I think it sounds like you guys are providing a lot of that maybe educational piece about maybe the importance of even just considering non-physical risk factors, which I think is an important first step for a lot of work. So thanks a lot. And just maybe a follow-up for that. So, you know, given that you are working a lot with organizations, do you have any examples to share with us of how you've seen non-physical risk factors mitigated in practice?
You know, it's a little bit harder. I think some simple things that people do, and you may not consider this to be groundbreaking, but having just standard operating procedures. You know, I think that's a great step forward. A lot of organizations don't have that. And for new people, it just elevates the level of cost of information on a step-by-step basis. It takes them some time, so it increases the stress. Even simple things like, you know, placing your tools in the right location with a shadow board, you know, making sure that you have, you know, clear visual indications of good and bad. I think those things fall more under the industrial engineering side of things, but they are all addressing those non-physical risk factors of, you know, communication, awareness, reducing stress, and even things like workflows, just making it as simple as possible, eliminating those non-value-added tasks that make things really, really challenging.
Thanks a lot. And let's keep moving forward here. So as we know, the future of work is changing. And I think there's been kind of a lot of emphasis on this and some research in this area as well. So with things like more technology and maybe even more mentally demanding and manually variable jobs. So how does this further impact the need to measure and reduce non-physical risk factors? And Jack, maybe we'll go to you first with this one.
In my opinion, unlike physical risk factors, psychosocial stressors are a moving target. Okay, for future job, the frequent monitoring of workers' psychosocial well-being is really the key in response to future jobs. So the future job will be more likely to impact the interaction of the physical risk factor and the psychosocial risk factors. And so therefore, we should focus on the effort on assessing the interaction between the physical and the psychosocial risk factor. And these areas of knowledge is really unclear. We know that psychosocial plays an important role in modifying the physical risk factors. And last year, we published a paper using a very large national data set from the National Health Interview Survey, 2016, I believe. And what we found is we stratified the data by the physical risk factor exertion level. What we found the interesting factor, the job controlled, and it's not a significant factor in the people who report high physical job demand, where job control was a significant factor for the people who reported little physical exertion. What does that tell you is if the interaction between job control, for example, one of the famous psychosocial risk factors, it's complex. It's not just say, well, you should give the worker job control. Well, findings indicate that if the physical job demand is so high, it doesn't matter how much job control you give them, you're just going to have a chance of developing low back pain. So, and the people who had little job demands and job control has become increasingly important. So we need to start paying attention to the interaction between physical and psychosocial risk factors in terms of developing the new interventions. So in my opinion, it's a future job. It's going to be variable. So that does require more cognitive ability to process information. We're going to have a cobot working with us. You're going to have to figure out how to manage the cobot, how to manage it. Like when you're wearing exoskeletons, there are some studies shows that your cognitive the demands actually increases while using an exoskeleton, and you may help you reduce the physical risk factor, but on the other hand, it may increase your cognitive mental load. So there are trade-offs, and we got to be careful about implementing different interventions in the workplace.
100% agree there, Jack. I think a lot of times when we integrate new technologies, they help us automate something that we understand, and we take that part of the job off of the human's plate, and then we leave all the hard things. And, I think of in my mind of maybe an office environment, years ago, if you called a customer, a hotline or a help desk, and that person would be answering a bunch of easy questions, some somewhat hard questions, and then the really hard questions. But during that whole process, they're learning by, repeating the easy answers. Nowadays with this additional automation, all the easy and somewhat hard questions are taken care of. And now that human being at the other end of the line only gets the extremely challenging and difficult questions, which just elevates their level of stress. So, there was some benefit, but then there's this unintended consequence. And I think this also happens in the physical work environment as well. Like we start to introduce, an exoskeleton or something like that, but then we, don't understand the impact on the cognitive side of things, or another type of cobot, and what are the new challenges that come onto it. So, you can see those types of examples in assembly lines that are completely automated, but that employee then has to set up the front end and the back end and do all the maintenance in between. And rarely did we consider the human for all those tasks. So that person is now put into all these, contorted posture and required to exert excessively high forces. So it really requires us to have a holistic view of all the tasks and make sure that we're not trading one risk factor for a different risk factor of equal or more level.
Yeah, great point.
And I just want to add a little bit more information. And unlike the physical risk factors, which can be measured objectively by all kinds of methods, right? But psychosocial stress can only be answered by workers. So frequent monitoring of workers' psychosocial well-being has become an important topic, in my opinion. And I remember one of my study partners, a very large automobile manufacturing company, that implemented a very interesting app. By the end of the day, and the app would just simply ask you to, like, are you satisfied or are you happy with your job? One simple question. And if they answer no, I don't know how they follow up, but that's a very good starting point. That means that they are monitoring their psychosocial well-being on a daily basis. And that's huge, in my opinion. And if just one question, it probably doesn't create a lot of burden. The benefit of having these answers from the response from their workers probably is very effective. The manager can start monitoring, well, 80% of my workers not happy with their job yesterday. What happened to yesterday's workload? And they can start investigating. And without that piece of information, without monitoring the psychosocial well-being, and you just don't know what's going on the floor. So I think with the new technology now, we can do a lot more. And of course, we have to protect their privacy and other matters. But that's I want to share with the public that in the future, I think frequent monitoring of the psychosocial well-being is the key.
That's huge. Thanks for sharing that. That sounds like a really great program implemented there. And we had another question roll into the Q&A that I wanted to get to here. This is a bit more specific. But this says, are there any comments on the participative hazard identification and risk management toolkit? So the APHIRM that's been recently published.
All right, I'll answer first. So
Sure.
this AFFIRM, or you call it AFFIRM, the toolkit was developed by Dr. Jodie Oakman in Australia in 2017, I believe. It probably took her more than 10 years. I think it might be officially published in 2017. It's been there's a growing usage in this toolkit. And this toolkit, it's a new kid on the block. And it's being used specifically for MSD prevention. So it's an interesting questionnaire, a survey that actually includes all kinds of psychosocial stressors, also the physical risk factors. One of the things I think we need a little bit more information on this toolkit is, I think for now, in my opinion, it kind of acts like more like a checklist type screening tool, because, for example, the physical risk factor in this toolkit only asks you about, did you lift or not, heavy lifting, how often, frequency of lifting, that kind of stuff. That information, if you want to mitigate the physical risk factor, that information, in my opinion, is insufficient. You kind of know the general trend of they are lifting heavy stuff, or they are frequently pushing and pulling, but you still need to go to the line to observe what kind of posture they use in combination with other risk factors. So that portion of the toolkit could be served as a checklist. If your goal is to use as a holistic approach, assessing all the risk factors, I think it's a good starting point to guide you through certain areas of the risk factor. And psychosocial factor certainly is big on the questionnaire. And that can help you narrow down in certain aspect of a psychosocial stressor among workers. And then you can start a conversation with the workers to narrow down to what's going on with your job dissatisfaction, for example, or do you have a poor relationship with supervisor? And you can start working on to the worker level, team level, and then organization level to see the entire safety culture among the company. So it is good a toolkit, and you can take a look to see if it fits your need.
Thanks, Jack.
Yeah. What I appreciate about tools like this, it really encourages safety professionals to communicate with humans on the floor and ask questions. I think just that part, independent of how valid or what type of questions are there, I think in this day and age is often overlooked. I think the amount of time that we spend watching our colleagues do work and asking questions seems to be going down year upon year. And anything that can get us back in that environment is something I would highly support, because it's amazing what you can learn when you just start to talk to an employee. And if you talk to them longer and longer, you learn more and more. So these tools, anything that these tools can do to accelerate that or maintain that, 100% in favor of.
Yeah. Great. And let's see, I know that we're coming up on time here, but maybe we can just get to one more question that came in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer any others that come in follow-up email. And we might have touched on this a bit, but maybe we can go a little more in depth here. So an attendee asked, there seems to be a lot of overlap between the ideas of total worker health and non-physical risk factors like we've been talking about. So have you ever recommended a total worker health approach to employers?
Me, I have. I mean, this is a nice program. And the essence of a total worker health program, the book I mentioned earlier called The Fundamental of Total Worker Health Approaches. This is a very short document. Please download a copy to review that. In the document, there's 2 pages. There's the workbook for you to figure out, what you're at in terms of 5 objectives, total worker health program approach to MS psychosocial well-being, right? So inside the table, you can actually evaluate where you're at in terms of your current psychosocial environment and what do you aim for. And so he guides you step by step to build a good psychosocial work environment to have a healthy work design. So it's a useful document. I do recommend using that document for mitigating the psychosocial aspect of the stressors for MSD prevention.
100%. I recommend it. I don't always dive deep into that element. Usually when people reach out to our organization, we're focusing on a part of it, but always recommend integrating the ergonomic approach inside that total worker health initiative.
Great. Thanks, you guys. And I think maybe let's see if we can squeeze in one more before we pass it back over to Nadia to wrap up. And I think this might be a nice note to end on because it has a bit of a call to action a bit for some of our safety professionals. So I talked about a bit the responsibility of safety professionals in this space. So it might seem like mitigating non-physical risk factors is out of the control of some safety professionals. So maybe how do you recommend that safety professionals be involved in the mitigation of non-physical risk factors at their workplaces? And Blake, maybe let's go to you first, and we'll wrap up with Kichak.
Yeah. I think it starts off with being present, open, inclusive, curious. Again, I could probably do all the technical aspects of my job from my office, but I probably couldn't solve problems unless I interacted with other human beings to truly understand beyond just those physical risk factors. And Jack, you may be able to share the appropriate answer here, but I do recall reading one of Bill Maris's papers that said something like, 37% of all MSDs are due to physical risk factors. So there's another 63% of things that we have control over, like how often do you interact with humans? What type of questions do you do? How do you ask them about things? There's a very different feeling from an operator that you're trying to help when you come again with a clipboard, wearing fancy clothes and a camera and a stopwatch, versus coming to their side and asking them questions and showing them the risk assessment. I think those are all the non-physical things that you can do that are in your control as a safety professionals to engage your employees and bring them into this process to make it easier for them to accept your good ideas and your approaches. I think that is 100% in the control of a safety professional, but not everyone knows how to do it. So there's an opportunity as a community to share some of those better practices.
Yeah, if you look at our MSD rates in our working population in the past 20 years, we make actually little progress. If you look at a lot of cost data, work compensation data, just prevalence rates from the National Representative Database surveys, you all show pretty much the same thing, hovering between 20 and 30% of working population. So we've been doing this for decades. We're trying to come up with innovation and reduce the risk factor for MSD, but we haven't done enough. And it's very complex. Number one, in my opinion, is really a current physical ergonomic risk assessment method may not be complete. And number two is our jobs are evolving. In the 70s, 80s, a lot of monotask. And now our job is becoming very complex. Look at the warehousing, the Amazon doing warehousing job, they're involving lifting hundreds of boxes. And those jobs cannot be assessed by the traditional ergonomic assessment method very well. And we need to start thinking about the new approach. The other contributing factor, you're right, Blake, you said about, physical risk factor only account for maybe, less than 50% of the total risk factor for MSDs. And we need to start thinking about the total worker health approach. We need to start considering non-physical risk factors, in particular, the non-physical risk factor that is common in the workplace as a starting point, and using a holistic approach to mitigate an overall risk factor. And we haven't done enough. So I think we are at a turning point where I think I encourage the safety professionals, don't feel like you cannot assess psychosocial stressors. I started out at biomechanics. In my first 15 years, I do a lot of laboratory-based biomechanical research. In the last 10, 15 years, I've done a lot of psychosocial research as well, and we all can learn. And there are more and more toolkits coming up to the market. Like I say, Affirm is one of the newest, has been being used by a lot of practitioners as well. And Jody has been promoting this product everywhere. So I think this is a good sign. And if we are more and more users engage in the psychosocial risk factors, and more likely we're going to discover that effectiveness of the different solutions in the workplace. And we just need to work together and share the knowledge between us in terms of the effectiveness of any intervention you think might be useful for mitigating psychosocial risk factors. So.
And Jack, I think you identified something really key here, and I wanted to point it out. Both Jack and I have backgrounds in biomechanics. So, everything to us looks like a biomechanical problem until you start to learn. And I think within industry, a lot of people have that similar background when, in the role of an ergonomist. And maybe it's an opportunity if there's any, teaching university professors on the call or people associated with research. The more and more that we can integrate, people with different backgrounds, I think is going to make it better. Sometimes it's hard to, teach us biomechanists something new after 25 years. But I do like all that research that's coming out, and it's an opportunity to really start to educate the broader safety professional group and then organizations.
Thanks so much for that, you guys. And just being mindful of time here, I want to give us time to pass it back over to Nadia. But I think this conversation shows that this is a really rich area where there's a lot to be learned still, and a lot for us to do moving forward. So I really appreciate our discussion around this topic. I think both of your leadership in this space is really apparent, and I know that the audience is going to be able to walk away with some great lessons learned from this panel. So Nadia, I'll go ahead and pass it back over to you to wrap us up.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paige, for leading the keynote, and Jack and Blake for taking part in this discussion. And thank you to the attendees who submitted questions or just tuned in today. If you have any more questions, please feel free to email the MSD Solutions Lab at nsc.org, and we'll put that email in the chat. And now we will move into our closing remarks. So thank you for your continued attention. By now, you've heard that MSD prevention should be a core focus for every industry and every manager. But when MSD injuries unfortunately do occur, it's critical to understand effective measures and best practices to reduce their severity. To that end, the MSD Solutions Lab is working on several resources to help organizations with addressing non-physical risk factors, in addition to other MSD solutions, including this infographic on accounting for non-physical risk factors. And this is now live, and this is a teaser. You can see this on the right. Paige kind of gave us a background of what the spokes look like. And here's an extended form of this infographic, which teases the full report that will be coming out in a few weeks, which is very exciting. And then we have 2 new case studies that have been released as well. And if you scan this QR code, it goes right into our resource page on our website. So you can keep an eye out for all of these new resources to help you address this. And here's what's ahead for the MSD Solutions Lab. So the MSD Solutions Index Report for 2023 to 2024 findings will be released at the end of this year. And for more information, you can catch the replay of our webinar that shared the findings from the 22 to 23 year report, which is found on our website and the MSD Solutions Lab YouTube playlist. And we're also continuing to advance pioneering research and innovation through our grant programs. So we have our 2024 to 2025 Research to Solutions and MSD Solutions pilot grant programs that were announced in May. And for our inaugural 2023 to 2024 grant winners, They will have an opportunity to present their findings at the NSC Safety Congress and Expo, which is about in 2 weeks in Orlando, Florida. And there will be 2 technical sessions, so one for the pilot grants and one for the research to solution grants. So that way you can tune in and learn about those grant outcomes. And speaking of Congress, we'll be hosting our 3rd annual Safety Innovation Challenge, where participants will be the tech solution providers for the 25-26 grant cycle for the pilot grants. And further, the top 3 Safety Innovation Challenge finalists will be invited for an innovation showcase on stage after the closing keynote, where you all, the audience members, will participate in live voting to choose a challenge winner. We've never done this before, so it'll be very exciting. We hope that you can come to Congress and attend the closing keynote event, and stay tuned on all of the emerging tech for MSD prevention alongside the MSD Solutions Lab. And then lastly, in this 3rd column, you can see that we'll have the annual NSC Future of VHS event, February 18th through 20th, 2025. More information about keynote speakers and breakout sessions will be coming soon, but you can mark your calendars for attendance. So thank you so much. And as we finish today's town hall, I want to encourage once more, if you have not yet joined the pledge community, please consider signing the MSD Pledge 2.0. As a hallmark of this initiative, members have this unique opportunity to identify their own MSD risk reduction goals over the next 5 years after signing, based on their own organizational specific objectives, resources, and priorities. So whether you have a 25% or 1% target reduction goal, our charge at the MSD Solutions Lab is to empower any organization committed to safety progress to join us and charter MSD Pledge members at the table in addressing this pervasive safety challenge. It is through this collective effort that all of us will be one step closer to achieving our vision of a world where all workplaces are free from MSDs and workers can live their fullest lives. And to those that have already signed the pledge, we thank you for joining us on this journey to transform workplace safety. And we're proud to continue this work together. And lastly, your input helps us improve. So please take a moment to respond to a few survey questions about this event. And thank you again, everyone, for attending today's town hall. And we hope that you have a safe rest of your day and that we see you again soon. So we'll give it a moment so that way you can answer the exit poll. So thank you so much. Bye.